Hello, everyone. I am Arbel Greener. I am a postdoctoral research associate with the Princeton University's Global Health Program, and I would like to welcome you all to this very special event, this very special Global Health Colloquium that gives us the unique opportunity to hear from Dr. Farida and to have access to a first-hand account of the now decade-long war in Syria. On behalf of the Global Health Program, I would like to thank Dr. Alyssa Sharkey for this opportunity and for conducting today's event in conversation with Dr. Farida. I will go on and introduce Dr. Sharkey, who will give us some context about the war in Syria and its implications on the lives of civilians and on the Syrian health system. Then she will introduce Dr. Farida more properly and lead us into the Q&A session, to which we hope you can all contribute. You can use the Q&A function for this, please. So Dr. Alyssa Sharkey is a lecturer in the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs and a senior health specialist in UNICEF's health section in New York. Her current focus areas are on equity and immunization, implementation research to improve health programs, and gender-related barriers to health services. Her previous roles with UNICEF have been acting regional health advisor in South Asia, maternal and child health specialist, and health specialist in monitoring and evaluation and knowledge management. Over the past 25 years, Alyssa has worked as a health policy analyst, program officer, and policy researcher within a variety of academic research and non-governmental settings, both internationally and in the United States. Dr. Sharkey has master's and PhD degrees from the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and a master's degree from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. So, Dr. Sharkey, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arbel, and welcome Global Health Program affiliates, Princeton colleagues, iRise affiliates, UNICEF colleagues, and other friends of global health. As Arbel said, I would like to share a few slides to give you an overview of the situation in Syria, and then I'll ask Dr. Farida some questions, and I will also then turn it over to the audience so that you can ask some questions. And I just need to change the view here so that you're seeing not the presenter view. Maybe it's here. My screen changed when we went live. Is there someone who can tell me how to shift this view?
Let's see. Let's change it to click the display settings in the top. Apologize, everyone. Do you see display settings at the top up there, the little drop down?
My screen, I think, looks different than yours. Oh, hi. There, is that better? I think
there it is. Yes, you're good.
Okay, I'm sorry, everyone. Okay, great. Let's get started. So I think many of you will remember these two grisly, heartbreaking photos. 3-year-old Alan Kurdi, who was washed up drowned on a Turkish beach in 2015 after his smuggler's boat capsized. 1 year later, there was this photo of 5-year-old Amran Daknish in shock, smeared with his own blood, sitting patiently in the back of an ambulance after being pulled from the rubble of a bomb attack that either the government of Syria or its ally Russia unleashed on the people of Aleppo, each child silent and alone. These children are both victims of the war in Syria, which marked its 10th anniversary just a few weeks ago on March 15th. The war started with protests against the government, calling for sweeping economic and political reform after more than 50 years of dictatorship. In response, President Bashir al-Assad ordered a severe and violent crackdown, and then unrest spread throughout the country as opposition groups took up arms. The war has created one of the largest humanitarian crises since World War II, killing more than 585,000 people and displacing an estimated 13 million people, 6.6 million as refugees outside the country, 6.7 million who are internally displaced. This is more than half of Syria's pre-conflict population. Of the displaced, only just over 9,000 Syrians have been resettled in third countries. And 2020 marked the lowest number of refugee resettlements, partly due to the pandemic. Last month, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that conflict actors have committed violations of international law on, quote, an epic scale, and that, quote, Syria's people have endured some of the greatest crimes the world has witnessed this century. While the war has impacted every aspect of life in the country, the toll on health and health services has been devastating, particularly in countries like Aleppo, a major hub of the war. Child life expectancy in Syria has dropped by a shocking 13 years. Violations of medical neutrality and international humanitarian law have led to the loss of medical personnel, civilians, and healthcare facilities, setting the country back to health levels last seen 30 years ago. The principle of medical neutrality allows for the treatment of all those in need without interference. Any dismissal of this principle is deemed to be a violation of the Geneva Conventions. However, in Syria, weaponization of healthcare, including attacks on healthcare facilities and targeting of healthcare workers, has been a defining feature of the conflict. Early in the war, the government introduced a law prohibiting medical providers from providing care to anyone protesting or believed to be against the government, under the premise that this is a fight against terrorism. Both medical professionals and patients have been arrested and tortured. This violent crackdown led the United States, the European Union, and the majority of the Arab League to call for President Bashir al-Assad's resignation in 2011. Even since that time, the government has been accused of war crimes, including chemical attacks on civilians. The international group Physicians for Human Rights estimated that as of last week, there have been 599 attacks on health facilities since the start of the war. These attacks have affected health facilities in numerous cities within Syria, with Aleppo enduring the highest number of documented attacks. Physicians for Human Rights has also documented the killing of 923 health workers in Syria since 2011, and systematic detention and torture of health workers who provided aid to protesters. At least 3,364 healthcare personnel in Syria have been detained or forcibly disappeared, never to be heard from again. In addition, more than 300 chemical weapons attacks have been documented by experts. With us today is Dr. Farida, and at her request, we're not using her surname. Dr. Farida was born in Aleppo in the late 1970s, went to Aleppo Medical School, and decided to become an obstetrician gynecologist. She said she chose that specialty in particular because it enabled her to save 2 lives instead of 1. In this photo, you can see the sign on the wall stating the son of war. Dr. Farida and her colleagues referred to all the children they brought into the world during that time as the son of war. Dr. Farida worked as an OBGYN at Omar bin Abdulaziz Hospital, shown here. She also lived in a rebel-held area in Aleppo, which suffered all kinds of bombardment, including internationally prohibited chemical weapons. In 2016, the government and its allies, Russia and Iran, sieged that part of the city and attacked the area with heavy bombardments. Many people died, and she and many others living in that part of Aleppo were forced to move from Aleppo to another rebel-held region called Idlib province. This is where Dr. Farida and her family lived for 4 years. The humanitarian situation there is dire, and a huge number of internally displaced people still live in camps in this area with limited schools and infrastructure. This is a hospital in Idlib shortly after it was bombed in May of 2019. And this is Adnam Kiwan Hospital in rural southern Idlib just after it was bombed in November 2019. Around this time, smugglers reported a growing demand for their services from people desperate to leave the country as a Russian-backed offensive by the government led to a drastic increase in violence. Dr. Farida recently came to the United States with her husband and young daughter with the support of the Syrian American Medical Society. Since arriving in the United States, they've been receiving support from the Princeton chapter of Interfaith Refugee and Immigrant Services and Empowerment Organization, also known as IRISE, which is a multi-faith, multi-congregational, multiracial organization committed to welcoming refugees and immigrants in central New Jersey. Some members of IRISE are joining us today. Dr. Farida and her husband, who's also a medical doctor, have applied for work visas and asylum status and are currently under probationary status in the United States. At the moment, there's a tremendous backlog of asylum applications due to American policy over the last several years, which severely limited granting of asylum status, particularly to citizens of countries like Syria. Dr. Farida, welcome, and thank you so much for being willing to share your insights and experiences as a medical doctor at one of the largest hospitals during the war. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Alyssa. I'm very happy because I'm here now talking with all these people just to explain what was going on inside Syria and the atrocities that we witnessed inside our area, and also what's still going on until now, and it didn't stop. So I'm happy to talk about that and to show the world what's going on.
Thank you so much. So my first question to you is, what was your work like at the hospital before the war? How would you describe a normal day before the war started?
Before the war started, I had my private clinic, and I used to go every day to my private clinic, and I had a good job and a lot of patients, and I used to go to the hospital just for my operations like cesareans and hysterectomies and normal deliveries. I used to go to the hospital, not every day. That was just as a private clinic. I was there on order. When there is a patient in the hospital, they call me, and then I go to the hospital. But after the war, everything was changed, and I will explain that. Before the war, my life was, it's not good, but it was like a normal life. But there was something inside Syria that we can't talk. We can't talk anything. Everybody inside Syria have to shut up. We can't talk any word against the government. So that was our life. But after the revolution began, everything was changed.
So maybe specifically talking about your work in the hospital, once the war started, tell us about what changed and yeah, what you had to deal with once the war started.
When the war started, the things was changed that I have to be in the hospital every day because there were not a lot of doctors. Their numbers were not enough. And also the OBGYN and obstetrician, there were just 3 in all the city, in the liberated area of the city. We were just 3 obstetrician. I was the only female doctor. So I have to go to the hospital every day to do a lot of operation. One day I remember I operated 15 women for cesarean and with a minor surgeries, a lot of minor surgery. At the end of the day, I was exhausted, and I have to see every day more than 100 women in both my clinic and in the hospital. I had no social life during the war. I sometimes I don't see my daughter during the war. and also my husband. We spent many days without seeing each other because I have to spend all my day in the hospital. Especially I can't leave my patients because there were no one else can do my job. I know that there were 2 doctors also, but they were men, and you know, in a conservative community like in Aleppo city, most of the women just refuse to go to a male doctor.
Okay, so that was a choice of the women, that they preferred
Yes.
you as a woman, as a female doctor.
Yes.
So I have a question. Given the ongoing bombings as well as sanctions that were happening, how were you able to continue work and perform operations? I mean, explain what might have changed. For example, how were you getting medicines and supplies into the country? Did you have the equipment you needed?
Yes, we have the equipment. They are coming from the borders from Turkey. We have what we need from Turkey, but after the besiegement of the city, we have nothing. And at the last month of the siege of Aleppo city, we didn't have oxygen because all the oxygen generators were bombed. So we were out of oxygen, and also we were out of a lot of ICU medications, and also a lot of babies died because there were no oxygen for the incubators. But before the besiegement, we had what we need from the borders from Turkey, and a lot of NGOs were paying for that medication. And I remember we had some medication which was so improved medication. I didn't see that before the war. They were supporting us. They want the people inside Syria, inside that area of the city to be treated in a good way. But that didn't work because after the siege, we were short of what we were more in need, not for that improved equipment. We need the essentials, but we didn't have the essentials, and we had improved equipment that we don't need it. We need like a gas, we need iodine, we need many things that we didn't have during the war, and also the oxygen. We didn't have oxygen, but we had a medication for chronic diseases, but we didn't have the essentials. Sometimes we didn't have cannulas, we didn't have SS saline, but we have some improved medications. That was during the siege, and that was a very hard area of time during the siege because everything was closed. We didn't have the essentials.
During the siege, did you also have electricity and running water?
No.
So how do you perform operations without those things?
I had a headlight, a light on my head, and I had the phones. We can just make a light with our phones, and we made that many times with phones. And we had generators, but many times there were no fuel for the generators. And also, you know, there's a lot of mistakes with the generators. Sometimes they just shut down during the operation, in the half of the operation. So I had to use that light on my head. So when I ran out of electricity, I just used that light, and also the phones.
Oh, and running water. So how did you sterilize equipment, and how did you keep things clean without?
We had water from wells. It's we know it's not that clean water, but we boil it, we use it, and sometimes we had clean water, but not all the time. It was rare to have clean water for drinking, but for sterilizing instruments, we use the boiling water from wells.
Were health workers getting paid during this time?
From the NGOs, there were many NGOs that are paying the health workers, but sometimes, especially during the siege, no money could enter the city. So we stayed for a few months, 7 months without any salaries. But that was okay because there were nothing to buy from the stores, because all the stores there were nothing. So we used just to live with what we have. And also we were recycling everything. everything, literally everything. They start to burn all the plastic to make fuel. They start to burn the trash just to warm up during the siege. So we were not spending any money just for food. And the food, there were not a lot of food. It's just cereals and just rice and burgers. That was the food during the siege. There were no chicken. There were no chickens, no meat during the food. It was just what we had, what we stored before the siege, because we were expecting the siege.
How did people travel to the hospital? Like emergency patients, how did they arrive?
Some of them walking, some of them on motorcycles, and some of them with ambulance. But the ambulance, especially after the midnight, they can use the lights, because they were all the time, there were an airplane in the sky just waiting for any moving lights just to bomb the cars. And many times that happened, they bombed ambulance after the midnight, so the ambulance just can drive without lights. So there were some ambulance, and also there were some cars, because the fuel was limited. There were no fuel, and during the siege, I used to walk. I didn't use any car. I used to walk from my house to the hospital. And also when there is any case, emergency case, the ambulance came to my house to take me to the hospital, but without lights, with no lights. They just drove in in the dark.
So just last month, there was a report in the Lancet journal that estimated that 70% of health workers have fled the country. Because you were one of the few remaining doctors during the war, did you have to provide additional care to people coming to the hospital beyond what you were trained to do as an OBGYN?
Yes, especially during the siege. Because during the siege, the number of doctors, we were about 200,000 population in the city, and the number of doctors were just 25 doctors. So I used to work something which is not relevant to my job. I'm OBGYN, so I used to make some different kinds of operations like hemorrhoids and also appendectomy, and a lot of times when there is a lot of injuries and the doctors can deal with a lot of injuries at the same time, so they just taught me how to deal with that injuries, like sometimes with a man with injuries in their gut. So I made that all kind of operation. I made that kind of when there is pneumothorax, I start to deal with that kind of cases. And there is a lot of times there were pregnant women with sharp nose in their bodies, and there is a damage to their veins and damage to their arteries. So I dealt with that kind of injuries with the help of general surgeons, and I was trained how to deal with that alone, because there was no surgeons and no like what is the name, orthopedics all the time. So I tried to deal with that cases until the other doctors came to help.
So there have been many reports about the Syrian government imprisoning and torturing medical providers. You've been very outspoken. You've been on CNN and you've presented to the United Nations and to the US about the fact that you provided care to all who came to you in need, regardless of their political affiliation.
Yes.
So yet you knew that doctors and other health workers were being targeted. Why did you continue to work in the hospital for so long?
Because people they need a doctor. If I left at that time, maybe a lot of babies will die, because no one can know how to deal with that cases, with many cases, especially if they're women bleeding, if they're women with high risk pregnancies. The other doctors can deal with that cases. So I choose to stay to save the lives of babies and women. And also, I just can say that I risked the life of my family and the life of my mother and father, especially when I spoke out in the media. My family blamed me because I was talking all the day about what's going on in the city. They told me, you are risking our lives. You know, we are living in the government area. And also what happened, a lot of my friends, they were midwives and nurses, they had been arrested when an area, that government took an area, took control of over an area. The first thing they will think is the health workers. They will take the health workers, arrest them to get some information from them about the other health workers. So that was what we did inside the city. Many of my friends were arrested. Many of the midwives that I trained were arrested. We didn't know what's happened with them. Many of them were freed after that, and many of them just disappeared.
What was your motivation to continue treating anyone who came to you, knowing all of these risks?
First thing that saving lives, especially the babies, make me feel better, make me relaxed. And also in our religion, that the one who saved one life as if he saved the whole humanity. So I wanted to save lives. And that's what now I regret. Because I left Syria, now I can't save lives. So sometimes I just think, if I was in Syria, I could save this woman. If I was in Syria, maybe I could save that baby. Because the maternal mortality ratio are very high inside Syria. So I was thinking that if I was there, maybe I could save this woman, maybe I could save that baby. But for now here, I'm just not working and preparing myself for the exam. But when I think about the babies and women inside Syria, I just feel guilty, to be honest with you.
So during the war, you mentioned that the hospitals were given these code names. So your hospital, Omar bin Abdulaziz, was known as M2.
Yes.
In an effort to protect them from attacks. Was that effective? And did this actually protect hospitals?
It was not protective, because the government and Russia, they knew the location of all the hospitals inside the city. But we used that code because we were just communicating with talkie-walkie. We don't want the government to spy on our talk, just to know which, in this case, in which hospital. We don't want them to know. In some cases, like sometimes there were soldiers came to our hospital to be treated. We don't want them to know this hospital now is receiving that number of cases, and this hospital, that there's a crowd of people in front of that hospital. But that couldn't just protect our hospital from bombardment. My hospital, for example, had been bombed more than 20 times. And I remember maybe more than 6 of them were chemical attacks. A lot of that attacks were by barrel bombs, a lot of them. And many times they mistake the hospital itself, and the bombardment were next to the hospital, and a lot of people around the hospital died. So the area around the hospital evacuated because it was very dangerous.
So tell us, how did you know when there was a chemical attack?
We smelled. The smell were very strange. And one day my daughter was with me in the hospital because there were no safe place to leave my daughter with someone else. So I took her with me to the hospital, and suddenly we heard that voice of a rocket, and we start to smell that chlorine smell, the smell of chlorine. And it was very heavy and it was very strong. We used the masks, and we start to get some clothes with water on our faces, and my daughter started to cry. She wanted oxygen, and I couldn't give her an oxygen. That was very bad. And at that moment, I felt I'm very bad mother, because I brought my daughter to the hospital, and it's very dangerous to get her to the hospital, because everybody in Aleppo City knew that the hospital is a target. They will attack the hospital. More than 20 times my hospital was damaged, and the last one was the hospital was destroyed, not completely destroyed, but we couldn't fix it again.
How old was your daughter when she was there at that time?
She was 7 and 8 years old. She was with me at the hospital. I used to take her with the hospital. My family, they moved to Western Aleppo, so I was alone at that time. So I had to take her with me to the hospital, but the hospital itself was very dangerous.
So aside from your workplace, what happened to your home during the war?
It had been bombed many times, but didn't completely destroyed. At the last time I visited my house, it was December 2016. I went to my house. That was the last day. That was very bad day. I said farewell to the walls, to my memories, to my photos, to everything I love in my house. And I took my precious things, my food. There's some food in my house, because during the war, during the besiegement, the most precious thing was food, because we don't have food. So I took my food and I said goodbye to my house. And there were an airplane in the sky was bombing all the time, and it was dangerous, was very dangerous. And I couldn't take the car to the hospital, to my house. I was walking in the street, and that was, my husband said, it's very dangerous to go now. I told him, no, I want to go to say goodbye to my house, to get my food, because there were no food in the hospital. So that was the last day I see my house. And I forgot to get a lot of things, like my photos, my books, my memories. I can't take a lot of things during there were a bombardment, and they were on the airplane were targeting everything at that time. So I went back to the hospital. I went to my house, then went back to the hospital. And at that time, there were a chemical attack. When I reached the hospital, oh my God, what is going on? The medical staff told me there were a chemical attack right now. I started to smell, and I used the mask, and my daughter was with me. She started to cry, and we just hide. We just said that was what we can do.
So what made you and your husband finally take the decision to leave last year? After all that time, why did you finally make that decision to leave?
We lived in Idlib city. After we evacuated from Aleppo, we lived in Idlib, the province, for 4 years. But in the last year, they start targeting again. The bombardment start again. And for me as an adult, I don't care. But my daughter, she's young. She start to cry, and she start to see nightmares again. Before, in the war, when we were in Aleppo city, she used to get some nightmares about the bombardment. And when it start again in Idlib city, she start again to see nightmares. She said, I don't want to be under bombardment again. I don't want to watch my friends just under bombardment just to have head injuries, because one of her friends, when they were in the school, one of her friends, she had head injury, and she needed a surgery in her head, and she had seizures. She said, I don't want to see that again. So we decided to leave. I know it was not easy for us to take that decision, to have the decision and to leave, but we don't have another choice.
Tell us about the journey that you and your family took to leave Syria last year. Where did you go first, and then how did you come to the United States?
From Syria to the US, there were no airplanes, so we have to leave to Turkey. So I left to Turkey, I was living in Gaziantep for 9 or 10 months until we proceed our application for the asylum application. And then the SAMS, Syrian American Medical Society, they helped us to be here with our airplane, with everything. They helped us, thankfully.
So what actions do you think are still needed to help the health workers who are still in Syria today?
They need to be protected. 2 weeks ago, one of my friends, he's a doctor and he was working in a hospital, and I used to work in that hospital. It's in Aleppo countryside, not the city itself, it's in Aleppo countryside. One of my friends, he's a doctor and he was in his work, and there were a bombardment to the hospital itself, and he lost his eye, and a lot of people was died. That was 2 weeks ago. So we need someone to protect the hospitals, to protect the health workers, not to still have injuries, not to die. And I remember when I was here just giving a testimony about what's going on in Syria, about the chemical attack. At the same time, I was talking about the chemical attacks. One of my colleagues died in Syria of chemical attack. He was treating the patients and he was in the operation room, and there were a sarin gas attack, and he died. He and his patient was died. So we need protection. They need to be protected. Also, all the location of the hospital are well known from the WHO that to be protected, but the regime in Russia still just bombing the hospitals, and also that's the schools.
Yeah, that's something I didn't mention in my intro, but we've heard a lot about schools deliberately being attacked as well.
Yes, my daughter Huda, when she was at the school, there were a bombardment at her school, and one of her friends, her closest friend, she had a head injury and she needed a surgery. And during the siege, there were no equipment for the surgeries, and she started to think about it. Am I gonna die under this? If I went to the school, I will go to my destiny. Maybe there's a lot of bombardment to the schools. She was all the time, she was afraid, all the time. She was afraid to go to the school. So I started to not to send her to the school. I prefer to take her with me. So if we died together, she will be with me in the hospital. There were no any other option just to protect her.
Wow. Okay, so maybe what we can do, you've shared a few photos of your own that I'd like to just pull up just quickly.
Yes.
We can go through those, but I also do want to encourage the audience to please submit some questions, because we will be happy then to switch to that part of the seminar. But let me just pull these up. I hope you can see. How about maybe you can talk about what are we seeing here in these two photos, Dr. Farida?
In these photos, the first one where there is a big truck, that was my clinic. That was the door of my clinic. I was in the clinic, and there were a heavy bombardment in front of. And at that day, luckily, I wasn't in the clinic, and there weren't a line of women in front of the door. If I was in the clinic and the woman was in front of the clinic or standing in that place, maybe there will be a massacre of women. And also, that was the other photo is the street of my clinic after the bombardment. And it's this street is full of stores. There were no soldiers, there were no fighters in that street. So why did they just bombing areas full of civilians? Why? They want to evacuate the area.
Okay. So how about these two photos that you've sent?
I was in my house, and there were a barrel bomb, and I was in the kitchen, you know, that was my food and was preparing the food. And I, and at that time, God protects me that I didn't have any shrapnel in my body. All around me, I just saw the glass around me, and there were a lot of glass, a lot of rocks around me. And I was surprised that I didn't hurt. You know, just look, there's a lot of glass in the food. And many times that happened, but I wasn't in the kitchen. But during that time, that was the hardest one. I was in the kitchen, and that happened next to me. And my daughter at that time, she was very scared. She started to cry. She said, "My mom, I don't want to sit in this area. I want to just go out." She wanted to escape, but we couldn't.
Okay, how about these two photos?
These two photos, during that time, I used to have some chickens. You know, that's two chicks, small chicks. And they disappeared in one of the bombardment. The other photo, they were after one of the bombardment. You see there's a lot of rubbles around them, but they were still alive. After another bombardment, I checked them, but I couldn't see them. They just disappeared. I didn't know if they dead, they still alive. I didn't know. They were just disappeared. I couldn't find them in between the rubbles because the situation was very dangerous, and I couldn't spend a lot of time looking for them because the airplane was bombing all the time. No, there were no any other few moments without a bombardment. So they just disappeared. I think they were die or dead, or they just escaped. I don't know. But I love them. They love me also. During the siege, this photo of a triplet, and the mother, she didn't know that that she was pregnant with a triplet, so she has a cloth just for twins, and the third one, he was unexpected, so it was like a good surprise for the family and for the medical staff. We were so happy because we had that third triplet, and we gave him a clothes from the hospital. You know, you just look at his clothes, it's different from the other twins. So that was from the moment that will keep you working, and from the moment that give you hope. We saved them, and we were so happy with that triplet during the war. Yes.
Wonderful. And then this is the final picture I think I have from you.
This photo is, we talk about, maybe I didn't mention that when we were talking, during the siege and during the war, a lot of the opposition themselves and Free Syrian Army, many times they show they're disrespectful for the health workers. And one day they arrest one of our friends. They took him and they tortured him. So we just make a strike. We told them, until you release our friend, we will stop the strike. So all the sides of the war were just fighting the health workers, not just the government, and also some of the Free Syrian Army.
Okay, well, this is unbelievable photos and story. I'm wondering now, Arbel, if there are some questions from the audience.
Yes, we have some questions, and we welcome the audience to pose more questions. But I will start with a question from Louise Sandberg. She, first of all, thanks you. We're all thanking you, Dr. Farida. It's so hard to react after everything that you shared. Thank you so much for your courage and for being here. And Louise asks, what are some concrete things we can do from this country? And I would like to add to this question by asking why you think, there isn't any bigger international mobilization of intervention and aid in Syria.
I can't just make a political analysis, but I think that the big countries like America and Russia don't want to involve in war together, because for a country, small country like Syria, I think no one cares about the 4 million now living in Idlib in a humanitarian crisis, dying of lack of food, dying of lack of medicine. A lot of people now just live in tents. A lot of women without bathrooms. When I was in Syria dealing with a lot of women, they came with urinary tract infections because they don't have a bathroom. I told one of the women, you need to go to the bathroom when you feel that you have to urinate. She said, there's no bathroom. I can't go to the bathroom. I just go in the morning and the evening. I don't have a bathroom. I can't. So the situation is still the same inside Syria. And the solution, the only solution for just to solve that humanitarian crisis, just to send all the people in the camps to their houses. All of them, they had a good life before, they had their farm, they had their own properties, but after the war, they had evacuated, now they're just living in the tents. Without food, without money, without education. Now no one care about education. The children just in the street trying just to have some steaks and just to warm themselves up. A lot of children inside Syria, I saw a lot of children without shoes. And before that, they used to have a good life. Before the war, they had a good life. But after they had been evacuated from their houses, they have nothing now. So the only solution just to send them back to their houses and to their properties, not to live in that tents without dignity.
Yes, and the question that was posed was if you think there is something this country can do. So I'm going to go on to the next question, but if at any time something else comes to your mind, please share with us. So Nash Mepukori thanks you as well. And he asked, could you tell us a bit about the state of mental health in Syria? Are there programs to provide trauma support in communities, especially for children and healthcare workers?
Yes, there's a lot of mental health programs inside Syria, and also SAMS are supporting, Syrian American Medical Society. They are supporting a lot of projects for mental health and also for women and for young children. But the situation itself can't be treated. 3 months ago, no, not 3 months, 2 months ago, one of my friends, she suicided. And she was a medical worker, but she suicided because of the bad situation. And a lot every day, I just heard about someone who suicided. Because when the humanitarian situation itself in the whole country, in the whole city is not good, you can't just bring someone from his tent and just give him a program for his mental health and everything's okay. You have to send him back to his house. You have to give him a good life. If anyone, just imagine you are living in a tent without a bathroom, and I just want to tell you, have a good mental health. That I think is impossible. If you don't have at the least of your life, you can't be in a good mental health, and even unless you get your life as a normal human being. But living in a tent, I think it's very hard to be in a good mental health. When I was there inside Syria, a lot of women, they were just coming to my clinic, just talking with me, telling me their stories. One of them said, I want to die. I'm living in a house with a 20 person and I don't have 1 hour for myself. I want just to stay calm, but I can't. I want to die. I prefer to die for this life, because all of these people are just gathering maybe 6 or 7 families in one house. So she said, I prefer to die. And also for your question about if the big countries can do anything, I don't think so. We were talking and we were talking about that many times, but I don't think that there's something that we can do just to send the people back to their priorities and to their houses. Maybe that is the only solution, can make things go better.
Yeah, so we have a question from Robert. I hope I pronounced this properly. Sharkey. This is Alyssa's colleague from UNICEF, and they're thanking you as well, and saying how much they respect your work and also your courage. And they're asking about women getting pregnant and making this choice amidst the war, and regarding reproductive health and the resources that women have access to during the war.
And in Syria, the community in Syria, they love children. At least each family have to have 5 children at least. They when they look at me, I have just one child, just one girl. They were so surprised and astonished. How could you have just one girl? That's my life, and I could barely just raise this girl. They love children, and also when you are living in the war, it's hard to get contraceptives. So a lot of pregnancies just get by mistake, and also they don't know. There are a lot of that woman with a low education, so they don't know how to about the contraceptives. So a lot of pregnancy just going on by mistakes, and a lot of women, they want to get pregnancies because they love children, and also the community, they love children. At least they're supposed to be 5, at least.
Yes, and Fida Ayubi, also, everyone is thanking you so much and admiring your courage. So I think I'll stop saying that. Just know that everyone is very grateful. Oh, this is just for us. If this is going to be shared, I can answer this later. I believe this is being broadcast right now, and that it will be on YouTube later available, yes, for watching. Jordan Klein asks, do you have an insight into an assessment of the current state of COVID-19 control measures in Northwest Syria? What would be feasible for COVID-19 control that is not currently being done, especially in the informal settlements?
Inside Syria, I want to say people in Syria, they don't believe in COVID, a lot of them. And if they believe in COVID, there is no way to avoid. So if you said to someone, you have to be under quarantine for 14 days from your family, if you were positive, it's impossible, because the whole family is living in a tent. So it's impossible to go just to set someone under quarantine. It's impossible. And also, if you just set the city under curfew, it's impossible, because the people there just work for their daily work. If they didn't work for this day, there's no food for the family, so they can't stop working. So you can't just set the city under curfew, or just tell the people just stay at your home and everything is okay. No, it's not okay, because a lot of people, they don't have money enough for 1 month. They don't have. And also a lot of people, they don't have the money for mask. In Syria, every mask will cost about the 5 masks with $1. So they prefer to buy a bread or food with this money than to get masks. No, there is no way. But a lot of NGOs inside Syria are working on that. There is a lot of announcements, a lot of advertising for just to wear masks, for social distancing. And some people inside Syria respecting that, but the majority don't believe in that. The majority. When I was in Syria and I went to Idlib city and I went to with my friends, And we were as workers, as health workers, we were wearing masks in the streets. And all the people were just looking at us surprisingly. Why are you wearing masks? When we told them that it's because of COVID, they start to laugh. They said, we tried all the kinds of death. So it's nothing if we died of COVID, it's okay. Because at least we will die in one piece, not in pieces, like if they were a barrel bomb.
Hard to go on. Boyd Hanold say you're their new hero. And they ask, in your opinion, are the majority of the displaced people willing to wait it out because they want to return to their own country, or would they choose to start life over in another country? Yes, that's the question.
For me, when I was an IDP inside Syria, when I moved from Aleppo to Idlib, I wanted to stay in Syria. I love my city. And also the community is it's our culture to stay in Syria. It's our soil, it's our environment. So we loved our country. A lot of people, they don't want to change. They want to stay in this the smell there, the smell of flowers, the smell of jasmine everywhere is different. I love America, it's a very beautiful country. And I'm here, but I really miss my flowers. I really miss the color of the soil. It's different here. But in Syria, it had something, it's relevant to our hearts. So a lot of people just waiting inside Syria, they had a hope to go back to their houses. When I was in Idlib for 4 years, I was waiting. Maybe one day I can go back to my city, to Aleppo city. I waited and waited and waited, but after that I lost hope and I lost everything in my city. So I decided to go out. But the people inside Syria, there is the love that you have to your country is still in their hearts. And also some of them tried to go out of Syria, like many of them just were in Turkey and they choose to go back to Syria. Because to be out of your country, sometimes it's a very bad experiment. For some of them, it's heartbreaking.
Yes, there is a question here from 1189 Kitcha about the health system in Syria, and if you know about it now, if there have been any improvements. And I would like to add to this and ask you about the epidemiology or the epidemiological profile of the country, and the interplay with the war. So people that are not dying directly from an attack, how the war changed the causes of death, health-related causes of death of the population in Syria.
For me as an OBGYN, during my residency, my master's degree letter was about maternal mortality ratio, and I make the study about it, and it was 100 for 100,000 live births. During the war, I calculated that, and it was 500 for 100,000 live births. So that it's doubled 5 times for maternal mortality ratios. And also a lot of people now is dying of heart attacks and of cancers and of suicides, because a lot of people, especially who had cancers, they can't get their treatment. They can't go even to Turkey, or they can't go to the regime areas to get that medication for cancers. So I know one of my patients, she had cervical cancer, and I tried to send her to Turkey or to the government area, but she couldn't go. She couldn't go there, so she died. Because in Idlib, there is just one center for cancer, just for breast cancer and for leukemia. But for the other cancers, there is no center for treat that kind of cancers. So a lot of people dying because there is no cure for their illnesses, and also a lot of people just dying. The lifespan is lessening inside Syria, and there's no medication. A lot of people just because they were poor, very poor, they don't have money just to buy their medication. And also, if NGOs gave them the medication, sometimes NGOs suddenly just stop the support for some NGOs. For example, I was working in Syria, and one day they stopped the hospital. They said there's no more support, so you have just to stop working. And that's still happening until now, still happening. Suddenly there were somewhere there's a hospital, suddenly they just close. We don't know why. So the health system, I can't say it's perfect. It's not good. We are waiting for the NGOs just to pay for the hospitals and for the medical staff, but sometimes they just stop. We don't know why.
We have a question about the situation in the capital, Damascus, and also, so they're asking, Peter Smith asks, what is the situation there? I'm bundling some questions now. Tell me if it doesn't work for you, please. There is also a question from Carlos Munoz about the situation of the refugees. Can you tell us a bit more about the refugee process in the US? Have you felt that the system has been helpful in building a life here? So these are two different questions. I'm
just confused between the questions because there are too many questions.
Can we go? I am sorry, it was just my screen that jumped, so I went to the question that was posed second after the first. So let's start with the refugees question about the process of seeking asylum in the US.
I think it's because maybe if COVID, it's very slow. And now I'm an asylum seeker, but we didn't get any improve. I don't have anything just to wait, but I don't have a lot of information about that. But for me, that's it. And you were asking about the situation in Damascus. It's very bad, very, very bad. My family is living in Aleppo city, and they said in Damascus and in Aleppo and the whole Syria, in the government area, there's a curfew now because there's no fuel in the city. So there's no cars, no one can go to his job. And also because of COVID, because there's a lot of cases of COVID and the hospitals are crowded with patients. So now there's a curfew and no one is going out of for his work, and also for the schools. Everything now is closed, shut down.
Arbel, I wonder, regarding the question about refugees, I think our colleague Louise, who's on, I think, who is leading the local chapter of iRise, she may know this, but I recall reading that on average it would take a family 7 years, from the time that they apply to come to the United States to actually arrive. And I think I think it's absolutely right that things must be moving much more slowly now than normal because of the pandemic. Although I do know that last year, I think the United States in 2020 in total allowed 12,000 refugees. There were only 365 Syrians last year. And then this year, the Biden administration has pledged to allow 125,000 refugees per year. That's from all countries. So we'll see, but it's a jump from the last few years.
Yes, thank you, Alyssa, for that. I also wonder what is the population that seeks, asylum in the US? Because people, what we read about is that people in Syria usually try to go to the border, right, to get out of Syria and go to Turkey. But so if there is, if anyone feels potentially welcome into a country like the United States, or if there is a specific public, you know, that that becomes a refugee here. And this is, I'm just thinking out loud.
By the way,
yes,
when the Syrians try to go illegally to Turkey, a lot of them are dying on the borders. They have been at shooting by the Turkish government, the Turkish soldiers. And one day my brother, one of them, and he was beaten, and then he went back to Syria. That was very bad. And I remember one day I was at the hospital and they brought us a woman, pregnant woman. She had a gunshot in her abdomen and she lost her baby. She was trying to go illegally to Turkey and they shot her in her abdomen. That was very bad. After we have been evacuated, the people inside Syria are dying in many ways. So they don't afraid of COVID.
Yes, Carlos Munoz sent another question about NGOs' presence in Syria, and he asks, in your opinion, what have been the most impactful interventions by NGOs in Syria?
I didn't get the question. Can you repeat?
Yes, about NGOs working in Syria. If you know of any that have been, you know, most impact, that have made a big impact. In your view?
Yes, there's a lot of NGOs are supporting the health work in Syria, and also the education, and also for food, and they're supporting especially the people inside camps. They are supporting them, but I don't know why. There's sometimes they just stop. We don't know why. Like I told you, I was working in a hospital that was in 2017. And suddenly they said we stopped supporting. And also that's still happening with many NGOs. Like that NGOs were supporting schools, suddenly they just stop. Like the other NGOs who were supporting food, suddenly they stop after maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years. We don't know why. I really don't understand the reasons behind that, but they just suddenly stop. But there were some impact for that NGOs inside Syria in a bad way, that the NGO which pay more will take the staff. For example, some doctors inside Syria, they just choose the NGO that give more money. They don't care about the timing of that NGO. There's some NGOs come for a short time, maybe for 1 year. They will be supported for 1 year, gave a high salaries. They will attract the health workers, and suddenly after 1 year they just disappear or just stop supporting that hospital or other hospital. That is so that maybe that is not good, because they are just supporting for short-term projects inside Syria. Some NGOs are supporting for long-term project, like SAMS inside Syria. They are now supporting a cancer hospital for breast cancer and for leukemia inside Syria. That was one of the biggest projects inside Syria. And also now they are supporting to isolation hospitals for COVID patients.
So hospitals that are only for treating COVID.
Yes,
patients.
And also there are many other projects for maternity, for general surgery, and for orthopedics. And there's a lot of hospitals. But now, for 1 year ago, they opened 2 hospitals for isolation COVID patients.
Louise, who Alyssa had mentioned, wrote us that only 1% of refugee applicants are approved of all who apply, I guess here in the United States. Jordan Klein has a follow-up question. What do you think of the roles of the interim government, Ministry of Health, and Idlib Health Directorate?
The problem is that in Idlib, there's 2 sides. There's conflict inside Idlib also. One is Ministry of Health, and one is with Al-Nusra. Do you know Al-Nusra? It's H, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Both of them had controlling the hospitals. So when Ministry of Health, they said that we want to control this hospital, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham will say, no, it's ours. So I know that things are not good inside Idlib. So that was one of the reasons that encouraged me to leave, because they're still fighting after all of these problems with the government. We still in our we all of us are opposition to the government, are opposing the government, and at the same time we are fighting with each other. So that was one of the reasons that encouraged me to go out of Syria. I tried many times to also in some hospitals there were a lot of managers, not one, and also a lot of NGOs. So we are not one hand. So that thing is not good in that area, in small area, crowded of people, to be not in one hand, not united. That is one of the reasons to fail.
Yes. There is a question by Azam Shahabuddin, and they thank you and say it was a pleasure listening to you. And they ask, do you want to say anything to the global community to support any aspects of the overall situation you and many other Syrian have faced?
Maybe the only thing that they can do to help us as Syrians, maybe, I know it's a dream, if the government was changed and that dictator Bashar al-Assad went out of the government, he and his family, maybe we can go back, everyone to his house, everyone to his city. That is the only way. After the Arab Spring starts, all that bad presidents went out except Bashar al-Assad. Why was he still here? Like Gaddafi, he died, he was killed. Hosni Mubarak he was out. All of them were out except Bashar al-Assad. He's still on his seat. Why? If he was changed, maybe all that crisis will be solved.
There is a message from Milada, and they're also a refugee from a civil war. They ask, according to your opinion, what are the biggest needs of refugees in your community, and how faith-based and secular organizations can help best these needs to be met? They're impressed with your life story.
I think the global community are helping Syrian refugees. I heard a lot about Syrian refugees in Germany and Europe and in Canada, and the global community are helping them. I think the only problem for Syrian, how to go out of Syria. That is the biggest problem. But whenever you went out of Syria, a lot of people will help, a lot of lawyers will help. I don't think when the people get out of Syria, everything will be solved. But I don't have a lot of information about the refugees. I'm one, but I don't know that because I'm new here.
Yes, thank you. Again, we are happy to share any information of a specific organization that you think people, can help. I mean, individuals, they can make any, contributions or have access to other ways of helping. So I would like to thank you so very much for being here today again, and for all that you've shared, and for your time, and again for your courage. And I think Alyssa has some words to say before we wrap this up. Thank you so much, Dr. Farida.
Thank you so much, Ara.
Yeah, thank you, Arbel. And I just wanted to close the session by saying that even war is widely recognized and accepted to have limits. The foundations of our modern humanitarian law have been built on ethical principles, cultural and religious teachings that have been followed throughout history. And even though Syria has faded from international headlines, I think even in this past year after the ceasefire between Russia and Turkey reduced some of the hostilities, the attacks on civilians have continued, as Dr. Farida mentioned. There have been recent reports documenting these ongoing human rights violations by both the state and other conflict parties. These attacks on health facilities and providers, it's remained steadily constant throughout the years of the war, and very little has been done to bring the perpetrators to justice for violations of international humanitarian law. So I think there are some things that the international community can do. I mean, health workers in Syria must be protected. Those who have been detained, and they should be released immediately. All conflict parties have to stop violations against healthcare and those who provide it. And also the Syrian government, the UN Security Council, all conflict parties, they have to ensure humanitarian access in Syria, which is still severely constrained. I think Dr. Farida's mentioned all of these things. But I did want to just conclude with a quote from a Syrian doctor. He said, "Crimes against humanity were committed every day in Syria, and the world was silent about it. And the world and world leaders bear huge responsibility for what has happened to the Syrian people. They could have stopped it. This is something that we have vowed as an international community not to allow the Holocaust to happen again, not to allow Srebrenica to happen again, not to allow Rwanda to happen again. But we did allow it in Syria. And if we continue to allow this to happen, it will happen again and again." So sincere thanks to you, Dr. Farida. You are an inspiration. You know, your courage and your strength, and for saving the lives of so many women and children in Syria. Thank you so much for sharing these experiences with us today. Also, sincere thanks to the Global Health Program, the Center for Health and Wellbeing for sponsoring this seminar, to Arbel, Sebastian, Gilbert Collins, all of whom made this happen. And then, of course, thanks to everyone who participated. Thank you to everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.